Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In my previous videos, I spoke about my experience of dystonia attacks, seizure-like activity after my first COVID infection, and dystonia I experienced during the seizures themselves. In this video, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the other symptoms I experienced after my COVID infection. I've not been very well the last over 1 month. I've basically been entirely bedbound. I've had a huge health flare. And so yesterday was the first day that I was able to sit up for most of the day. And so although I'm still feeling extremely unwell and that I'm having to lie down in bed most of the time, most of the days, I'm taking this opportunity now that I'm able to sit up in this moment to film a little bit more about some of my symptoms. I experienced severe sensory sensitivity when I started having seizures. Would come out of the seizure-like activity and all of my senses would be extremely heightened. I'm autistic, and so naturally my sensory sensitivity is extremely heightened anyway, but this was something else that I'd never experienced before. Completely out of this world. That's the only way I can describe it. It was an out of this world experience in that I could hear every single tiny sound possible. I could hear every tiny pin drop, quite literally. It was something that I've never experienced before. Every tiny sound sounded extremely painful to my ears. Every single colour looked extremely colourful. The colour white looked so white that it looked see-through. It felt like if I looked at a white piece of paper, that piece of paper was burning my eyes. That's how it felt to me, and I kept telling everybody it feels like the colour white is burning my eyes, because it felt like white was so incredibly white that it looked see-through. It's a very strange way to describe it, but that's the only way I can try to explain how I was experiencing the world. The colour white just felt like it looked transparent to me. That's the only way I can describe it. It felt like the piece of paper was transparent, even though it wasn't. It's very unusual. I struggle to try to accurately describe or adequately describe what this felt like, because there's no words really in the English language to describe adequately what I was experiencing. It felt like all of the colours were so unbelievably colourful that it felt like the world wasn't real. That's a topic that I'm not going to talk about too much anyway, because it's questionable whether the world is real anyway, but it felt that way anyway. It felt that the colours were so bright, the world did not feel real, and not in a dissociated way. I wasn't dissociated in that sense. It was just the experience sensory-wise, how I was experiencing the world was almost like it was triggering a dissociated sort of experience, except it was much more than that. This sensory sensitivity continued to get worse and worse as the weeks and months went on. By the time it got to March 2023, I would literally be screaming at the tiniest sound because it was so unbearably painful to hear. The lights were so bright, I would scream because it was burning my eyes. If someone knocked on my bedroom door very gently and very quietly, I would start screaming because it felt so unbelievably, unbearably loud to my ears. And I knew it wasn't the staff's fault, and they respected for the most part that it wasn't my fault. But no one could understand why I was feeling this way or why I was experiencing the world in this way. But I just remember so clearly that someone knocked on my door really gently and really quietly, and I could not stop screaming because it was so painful to my ears. I remember on one particular occasion, there was an agency night shift worker who was on shift, and I don't think they'd even worked at the hospital before. I'm not sure. There were so many staff changes, I have no idea. But it wasn't someone I knew. It was a stranger, and they did the observations in the middle of the night, which was a very sensitive topic for me anyway, and something I found very unbearable. But because of hospital policy, I had no choice but to go through with it. However, this staff member, in order to see if I was still alive or not, how they did the observations was by loudly opening the bedroom door and then just turning on the light in the middle of the night and then turning it back off again as soon as you sit bolt upright in your bed because you've just been woken up in the middle of the night every single 30 minutes or every single hour or every single 15 minutes this went on for. And I just started screaming, not only because I was in sleep and now I'd just been woken up by a stranger at my door who was turning on the light and turning it back off and then walking out my bedroom. But the light itself was burning my eyes. And so this went on every half an hour for the rest of the night shift. And I would be screaming. I was beyond distressed. I was barely sleeping as it was. And the lights were so bright that I would be screaming. In my symptom diary that I was writing every day and that I've continued to write every day for 4 years, in the symptom diary in March 2023, regarding my sensory sensitivity, I wrote, extreme sensory issues the past few weeks since eating again. Feels incredibly scary. Feels almost painful to have my eyes open because everything is so bright and colourful it physically hurts. Everything feels weird to me. Every tiny sound I can hear even more clearly. Life doesn't feel real. Another symptom I experienced after my first COVID infection was severe, sudden onset of personality changes. I experienced severe personality changes after my COVID infection, to the point where I would personally argue that my personality changes and rage were probably the worst and most scary symptoms for me. Not even the seizures, not even the dystonia or the dystonia attacks, but I think for me the most disturbing part of my experience was actually the change in my personality and feeling like a monster had taken over my brain and feeling like I was no longer Roxy. Autumn months of 2022, when I started having seizure-like activity, dystonia, tics, and all of my health symptoms started getting a lot worse very quickly, what I experienced was a sudden onset also of personality changes overnight. I was extremely emotionally dysregulated. I felt out of control of how I was feeling. It felt like I wasn't me. I would scream if someone called me Roxy, because I truly believed that Roxy was not my name. I didn't know who I was, I didn't know what my name was, but I just knew that my name wasn't Roxy. My name is Roxy. I just had severe personality changes. I don't know what happened to me. I stopped listening to music. Music is my number one special interest. I'm autistic, and for me, music is my life. I listen to music non-stop, all day, every day, since childhood. That is the only thing I find true joy outside of nature. But for me, in the autumn of 2022, overnight, I stopped listening to music. Quite literally overnight. I had no interest in music. I had no interest in any of my other interests. I just stopped listening to music overnight, and I didn't know why, but it just was no longer something that had any interest for me. And to be honest with you, this was a very upsetting symptom for me, because I'm obsessed with music. When I'm healthy and well, I'm obsessed with music. I listen to the same song on repeat for hours or days or weeks. I love music. But something bizarre happened in that in the December of 2022, I stopped listening to music so suddenly, and it just continued to get worse and worse and worse, to the point where, as the months went on in the start of 2023, I would be screaming if I heard music, if I even heard the slightest sound of music, if I heard the slightest sound of music, say if it was playing on a TV in the lounge, if I walked into the lounge, I would cover my ears and literally just start screaming for somebody to turn it off, or I'd leave the room myself. I could not bear the sound of music. It was horrible. I don't know why, but I just could not bear to hear any sound of music. And I have no idea why. I just had severe personality changes. I had other changes to my personality where I had extreme rage and violence. I am not a violent person. I'm not a rageful person. However, after I got my first COVID infection, I had a sudden onset of very, very, very severe and scary rage, which is not in my character and it's not in my control. And I had other symptoms like very severe aggression, and I did become quite violent and not very nice person. I'm only talking about this to raise awareness, really, not to feel ashamed or embarrassed, because it wasn't my fault. My brain was very inflamed, but it is a symptom that I experienced after COVID, and it is something that can happen to someone's brain after a viral infection. But overnight, I became very aggressive. I became very violent. I became a very nasty person to be around. I turned into a monster. I became full of rage. And I didn't think it was possible for me to ever have these sorts of presentations or interactions with people or feelings. But it just wasn't me. And I kept telling everybody something is seriously going wrong in my brain. Over and over again, I would say something has seriously gone wrong in my brain. And when I would have these outbursts of rage, I remember feeling so guilty and so awful about it afterwards, and just feeling extremely, extremely confused, like it came from nowhere, it felt to me as if someone else had taken over my brain and body, and it just wasn't me. And I'd left the building and someone else had taken over. And then when the rage stopped, I came back to myself and just felt awful, because it's like, what's happened? That wasn't me. I don't know why this is happening. And I felt that was probably the worst symptom for me, because I knew that it wasn't me. I knew it wasn't in my character. I knew it wasn't in my nature. I didn't like how I was acting. And yet I had literally no control over it. It just felt like a monster had taken over and was harming people. I had extremely dark thoughts, which wasn't normal for me. I felt like I was a dinosaur roaring at the top of my lungs. That's what I was presenting like a dinosaur roaring from the top of my lungs, or maybe it's the bottom of my lungs. I don't know how the saying is, but yeah, I didn't think it was possible for someone so small to make so much noise from their lungs. I really struggle to comprehend how I was behaving and how I was acting. But like I said, I'm not talking about this to embarrass myself or make myself feel ashamed, but to raise awareness and to make people feel less alone if they've also gone through severe personality changes and rage after some sort of neuroinflammatory condition or encephalitis or brain injury, because that's how it felt to me. It felt like my brain was injured and something had seriously gone wrong, but at the time I didn't know what. It was pure rage I was experiencing. There's no other way to describe it. It wasn't an anger or a distress. It was rage. It was like my brain was on fire. That is the only way I can describe it. It felt like my brain was actually on fire, and it was making me present this way. And it was a really, really dark time of my life. I had written in my diary on the 17th of March, 2023, I still don't feel like Roxy. I don't have any feeling at all to do with anything. I forgot that breakfast was a thing. I essentially lost all of my hobbies and interests overnight. But it wasn't a depression. It was not a mental illness. And I kept saying to everybody, this isn't an anxiety, a depression, or even a dissociation. It was something that I'd never experienced before. And it was like something had gone wrong in my brain. That's all I kept repeating to somebody. I kept saying something has seriously gone wrong in my brain. It wasn't a mental illness. I'd experienced mental illness before. It wasn't a depression. I'd experienced plenty of depression before. It just felt like my brain was hurt. Something was wrong in my brain. My brain was injured. Something had gone wrong. It was as if my personality had gone. It felt like what made me had just disappeared. Quite literally disappeared in an instant, overnight. And I didn't know why. And at the time, nobody else did either. My blood sugar got very, very, very low in the February of 2023. I wasn't able to eat anything for 3 weeks because of having severe dystonia attacks after eating. I've explained in previous videos about my experience with dystonia and dystonia attacks after eating food. In the March and February of 2023, I was experiencing this, and therefore I couldn't eat for 3 weeks. I was feeling very, very, very physically unwell 24/7, every second of the day, mostly because of my low blood sugar. I was unbelievably hungry. I've never experienced hunger in my life before the way I experienced hunger in the February of 2023, and this is coming from someone who had a very extensive history of an eating disorder, and yet in the February of 2023, I didn't hardly eat a single thing. For most of that month, I lived off purely Lucozade, because anytime I tried to eat anything, even one spoonful of sweet corn, I would have a 4, 5, 6 hour dystonia attack where my limbs would be contorted and twisted and stiffened out of my control. And this would last hours. And I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to die in the middle of a dystonia attack because it was so unbearably painful. I thought I was going to die from low blood sugar mostly. I was hospitalised with a blood sugar of 2.4 in February of 2023. I had been treated quite poorly, in all honesty, in A&E up until this point. Anytime I presented to A&E, I was treated quite poorly. The staff from the hospital I was at would come with me to the emergency department, and they would always note and say to me, "Roxy, you've been treated really badly today. They've treated you really poorly." Every time I went to A&E, I'd be treated so badly. I think they just thought I was a psychiatric patient, and in their eyes, therefore, this was a mental illness, or they thought maybe I was making it up, even though it's impossible to. I looked very, very ill because I hadn't been eating anything, and so I'd lost a lot of weight. And so they thought it was an eating disorder, and therefore they didn't want anything to do with me. They thought the mental health hospital should be dealing with this, but they couldn't deal with it as much as they tried to. It was getting to a point where it was a physical health issue, in that my blood sugar was severely low and it was hard to manage. No matter how much Lucozade I was drinking, I couldn't really settle the blood sugar at one point until I was able to take some medication eventually that stopped the dystonia attacks so that I could eat. I had been sectioned at this point. In the January of 2023, I was sectioned. Being sectioned means that you are legally detained in the hospital and therefore cannot leave. Prior to that, I had been an informal patient. Informal meaning you were not legally detained at the hospital. But I had been sectioned because of how bad my mental health was, and because of how severe the seizures were, and at the risk that this was to my safety, because I was very disorientated when I was going in and out of seizures. And so for my safety, they had to section me so that they could keep me at the hospital. I had a seizure in public, and an ambulance was called, and I was taken to hospital. And I remember clearly that I came out of the seizure when the paramedic gave me some glucose gel. He had tested my blood sugar, which I found out was 2.4, and immediately he gave me glucose gel, and he was trying to put it in my mouth, rub it around my gums whilst I was having a seizure when I was coming out of the seizure. And I remember very clearly, because my blood sugar was so severely low, I was extremely disorientated and I was extremely confused. And I thought I was at the dentist. I didn't know what was going on. I just remember coming out of the seizure, and there were like very, very bright lights above me from the ambulance. And I just remember this man with a pair of gloves on was trying to put his finger in my gums. So I thought maybe I'm at the dentist. I wasn't at the dentist. I was in an ambulance on the way to A&E, and that was a paramedic trying to give me glucose gel because my blood sugar was so low. And I remember very clearly he said to me, "Do you know what your blood sugar is meant to be?" I remember I told him it's meant to be around between 5 and 6. And he said, "Yes, you're very clever." He says, "You're a clever girl. Your blood sugar is 2.4, he says. "So you need to drink this glucose gel because you're not very well at the moment." And so I remember going into A&E, and this was, I think, the only time I attended A&E where they took me seriously, where they cared for me well, because they realised that, oh, she's really not very well at the moment. Her blood sugar is 2.4. I was freezing cold. I had left the hospital when I wasn't meant to be, and I had left the hospital in nothing but a very, very thin t-shirt and a very, very thin pair of jogging bottoms. It was February of 2023. It was freezing, freezing cold. Everyone around me was in hats, scarves, gloves, and very thick winter coats, and yet I was walking the streets in nothing but one tiny, very thin t-shirt and very thin jogging bottoms. I had no phone on me, I had no food on me, I had no money on me, I had no bag on me, I had no coat, no scarf, nothing. I had just left the psychiatric hospital in nothing but a very thin t-shirt and thin trousers. And that was it. I had nothing. And so when I had a seizure in public and I went to the hospital, they were concerned and they gave me around 5 blankets, which is very, very rare in hospital. You're very lucky if you can even get 1 blanket, but they gave me 5 because I was ice cold. My blood sugar was 2.4. I was extremely, extremely confused, and the staff surrounded me and they gave me drips and fluids and glucose, etc. straight away. And I remember as they were assessing me, the doctor said to me, "Okay, do you know where you are?" And I said, "Yes, I'm in hospital." And he says, "Okay, do you know what hospital?" I said, "Yes," and I told him. And then he says to me, "Do you know what month we're in?" And I said, "June." I said, "June." I repeated June over and over again, and I could feel the energy in the room shift, and I could feel all the staff exchange looks to each other. And we weren't in June, we were in February, and yet I thought we were in June. I was freezing cold, and I kept telling everybody that we're in June. And I think at this point they began to get very, very concerned. So they very quickly gave me lots of fluids and kept me warm and gave me some glucose drips. And within half an hour I was feeling much better. I felt more healthy and alive and well again, and I was able to talk and regain some sort of awareness of what was going on. But at that point they were concerned. I was discharged that day. The doctor admitted to me that she'd never seen anything like this before. I had said to her that I had barely eaten in 3 weeks, and she initially had seen me a few days earlier in A&E, and so she recognised me and she said to me, "What's going on?" I said to her, "I promise you this is not an eating disorder." I said, "I appreciate that I look like I currently have an eating disorder because I've lost a lot of weight, even though eating disorders don't have a look and don't have a weight. But stereotypically, I guess, in their eyes, I looked like an eating disorder patient in a mental health hospital because I looked very sick and I wasn't eating." But I told her that this was not an eating disorder. I said I have a history of an eating disorder, but I want to eat and I'm not afraid of gaining weight at the moment. I said, this is happening after I eat and I don't know why. We didn't know COVID had triggered this at the time. We just said, this is a mysterious illness and we don't know what's going on. And that was the first time she believed me. She just believed what I told her, and she said, "Okay, but I don't know how to help you." She said, "I've never seen this in my life before." She'd never seen a dystonia attack, and in all honesty, I don't think they knew what a dystonia attack was. I don't really recall them ever even referring to it as dystonia. I think they thought it was seizure or something. It wasn't a seizure. It was a dystonia attack after eating. But the doctor admitted she had never seen this before. And so I was discharged back to the psychiatric unit. Benzodiazepine muscle relaxants did nothing. Paracetamol did nothing. Any sort of general pain medication did nothing. I tried other medication, but it made me very, very sick and made me a lot worse. It dropped my blood pressure lower, and so I had to come off it straight away because I was feeling unbearably ill. And so we didn't know really what to do. I truly, truly believed that I was going to die because I was so unbelievably ill. My blood sugar was so low, I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't barely stand up. I couldn't think. I was just extremely, extremely ill. And then thankfully, one of the psychiatrists that was at the hospital decided to trial me on a mixture of medication, which was procyclidine and baclofen. And that was the only thing that worked, and it worked immediately. I was able to eat food, and because I'd taken the medication, rather than it lasting 6 hours, the dystonia attack, I remember very clearly it only lasted 15 minutes. I couldn't believe it. It felt like a miracle. And then as the days went on, rather than being 15 minutes, it was 10 minutes, then 5 minutes, then just 2 minutes, and then it just stopped. And that was all thanks to the doctor who prescribed me a mixture of baclofen and procyclidine. If he hadn't done that in the exact moment that he did, I probably would have died because I was so ill and I just couldn't eat anything. My blood sugar was very low and my my electrolytes were very low and unbalanced, and we didn't know what to do. And this was a psychiatrist. He was not a physical health doctor. He was not working in A&E. He was not a neurologist. But thankfully, because of his own knowledge and his own common sense and his own research and his own experience, he prescribed me a mixture of these two medications, and it saved my life. I truly believe I would have died if I had not taken these medications when I did. Because my blood sugar was so low and I didn't know it was low, I thought I was very, very thirsty. So I was drinking at least around 5 litres of fluid a day. It threw off my electrolytes massively. I have no idea how much water I was drinking, but I estimate it wouldn't surprise me if I was drinking maybe 4-5 litres at least of water a day, which would explain why my electrolytes got thrown off. I thought I was really thirsty. I had no idea that it was a blood sugar. I have no idea what I was just saying because my camera just died. The battery died, so I don't know what I just said or what the last thing I said was. But essentially, I got very sick from low blood sugar and I thought I was going to die. It just felt like my brain was broken. It felt like my brain health was rapidly deteriorating by the day, by the hour. And even now as I'm talking, in this very moment, I can literally feel my neck. My neck is pulling to the side. As I'm talking now, I just had some tuna and now my neck has become dystonic. This is where the neck muscles are contracting out of my control, and in this case, it's pulling me, I can see, to the right-hand side. And I can't really think very well, so I probably will have a seizure in a minute, so I'm going to stop filming anyway, but essentially my camera died, so I can't remember what I was saying. And I'm a massive technophobe, so I don't know how to find out what I was saying. But I wasn't very well. I'm going to insert some photos now of what I was looking like in the January, February and March of 2023. The photos that I have are actually photos of when I was looking better, believe it or not. The photos that I'm going to insert, I actually was looking a lot better and a lot more well than I had been looking in previous moments and previous days. That's why I had managed to take a photo of myself, because I was feeling well, which is quite scary now looking back because I look very ill. But for me, that was me feeling well. That was a huge improvement in my health. And so I remember I had gone to like an exercise class or something because I managed to stop having dystonia attacks. And I was really happy that I'd managed to get back to an exercise class. And so I took a photo of myself. But I look very, very ill. At least I think I do anyway, in comparison to what I look like when I'm healthy. So yes, the photos and videos that I have are actually footage of me when I was well in comparison to before. I don't have any footage of what I was looking like at the worst of my time and the worst of my symptoms, because that was not in my mind at all. I could barely think, never mind think about taking a photo. But I'll insert the footage now. I'm actually going to have a seizure as I'm talking now. I can feel this movement in my eyes. This is out of my control. I think it feels like my cranial nerves possibly are impacted, because cranial nerves are in charge of the eyes and eyebrows and mouth movements. My psychiatrist once said a few times to me that it looks like cranial nerve damage. I don't know why this keeps happening. In recent weeks, my health has been very bad. I literally can't control this. It's not a seizure. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's not. It doesn't feel like a tic. It just feels like out of control movements. Oh. Oh. My neck. I just had cluster seizures. Oh my god, it's going to go again. Oh. Oh, my neck. Ow. My neck is stuck. Ow. Seizure stopped, but my neck is stuck. Ow. My neck is stuck like this. I am not in control of this. This is dystonia in my neck. I Oh, my neck. I've had immense neck pain for the last over 1 month that I've been in bed. I've barely been able to sit up because of how excruciating the pain in my neck is and how unbearable the strange sensations in my head is. I am not joking when I say I have been almost exclusively bedbound for 1 month, over 1 month. I have barely left the house. I have barely sat upright at all. I only sat up for the first time for most of the day yesterday for the first time in over a month. And I'm going to have to go lie down now because I don't feel very well. Lying down is the only relief that I get somewhat of my symptoms. So I'm going to go now and end the video. I don't feel very well and no doubt I'm going to continue having seizures and dystonia and whatever else. But I hope you learned something in this video, and I hope you feel less alone if you also are going through any sort of post-viral neuroinflammatory condition. And you're not alone if you've experienced any sort of severe personality changes or rage. It's not your fault. Your brain is inflamed. And I hope that you get treatment for your symptoms. I'm going to go now, and I hope you like and subscribe. And I'll see you in another video. Bye.